Now we'd like to welcome the Reverend Mark Fowler.
Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you all. It's interesting because I'm very moved at this particular moment. I was remembering yesterday and this morning that this is kind of a special time for me with the New Thought Spiritual Center of Eastern Long Island because it was a little over 8 years ago that I gave my first sermon to this community. And that was the second sermon that I had delivered after I was ordained at One Spirit. And I'm just moved at who you called me to be. Um, the opportunities that you've provided for me to grow and for me to listen to what God would have me do. Those are not things that I think I often saw the connection of, but in service of our theme today of consciousness, I am aware and grateful that Spirit has placed us all in communion and community with one another. And the greatest gift that we can give one another is to call forth that which is within us and stand for the greatness of each other. And that's what you've provided for me over the past 8 years. So I'm just in the spirit of deep, deep gratitude this morning for all of you and all of our experiences thus far. I'm also present and aware to gratitude that there are a few friends who joined us this morning. One of them is my friend Nadina Day, who you might see her window. Nadina and I went to college together. And just 5 years ago, we graduated. And, but I think about the time that we spent together and at Duke, um, and again, consciousness not knowing that when we got to Duke, it had only been about 17 years that the undergraduate college had been desegregated. And we were among the first generations of students who went to a desegregated Duke University. And I know I didn't have any awareness about that fully when I was there, but it has shaped my life in a powerful way. And having friends like Nadina be present for us to walk that journey together is just so amazing. My best friend Juan Battle is on the call, and he is one of the people, probably the most reliable person in the world, to tell me what I should be doing and support me in all the things that I don't think I can do. And he's just constantly there saying, yeah, you can. And friends Enid and I think Neil is on the call as well. So I'm just present to gratitude this morning. And perhaps that is a good way to start this talk about the myth of consciousness and a mind being a terrible thing to waste, or maybe more directly, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. Divine mind is a terrible thing to waste. God is a terrible thing to waste. When we look at the definition of consciousness in the gospel according to Merriam and Webster, consciousness is defined as the quality or state of being aware, especially something within oneself. So not just being aware of outside stimuli and circumstance, but the first definition of consciousness is the quality or state of being aware, and especially of something within oneself. It's also defined as the state or fact of being conscious of an external object or state or fact. And it is also defined as awareness, especially concern for some social or political cause, like raising consciousness, raising awareness, that it is an active process and that it doesn't just happen on its own. And there are some other definitions of consciousness, but I think these three are a place for us to explore this morning and to think a little bit more about the state of being of consciousness, like who are we, what is our consciousness, but the actions that we take in consciousness, in awareness, and that none of this is by accident and all of it requires work. Ernest Holmes says, "It is only as we live in conscious union with spirit and consciously let it work through us that we really live. It is only as we live in conscious union with spirit and consciously let it work through us that we really live." So some questions I'd offer for you this morning. What is your current state of being with God? What's the current state of awareness? Not the temperature, not how it feels, but what is your conscious current state of being with God? And another question I'd invite you to consider this morning is, how are you raising consciousness? Not just your own, but how are you raising the consciousness that we all share, that we all participate in? Because as we've heard, and Kim, I just thank you so much. There was so much richness in the prayer that you offered this morning. The idea that there is no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there is just right now. And so in the right now, what is your current state of being with God, and what are you raising consciousness for? Because the other sides of those questions are, I don't know what my relationship is with the divine. And better you say that and know it so that you can get back in relationship. And I'm not really raising consciousness for anybody else right now. And just know that, but also know that you are part of something greater. And it's almost like going to rob a bank and stealing a dollar and then running away. So the first myth I'd like to explore with you this morning is that we are one, that God and I are one. And we walk around that, we say that, I think we believe that most of the time. But the sub-theme for this talk was and remains an appeal that was created in 1972. And it was created by the United Negro College Fund. And it was their very first public service campaign, where they invited people to contribute to the United Negro College Fund for young, at that time, Negro, Black, before the term African American had skipped the scene, asking people to support the education of young Black people because a mind was a terrible thing to waste. The fund was actually created in 1944 by a man named Frederick Douglass Patterson, who was the third president of what was then the Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University. And it was a campaign to raise funds. And what Patterson realized was that all of the private Black colleges were struggling to raise funds. So over time, it was decided that they would combine all of their efforts for all of the historically Black universities and colleges to seek funds together and then distribute them appropriately. That appeal has become iconic at this point, and almost to a certain degree in a dangerous kind of way, that we don't even see the connection between the original request to save a mind, because a mind was a terrible thing to waste. Now it's almost become kind of like a joke where somebody does something, you say, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. It's almost kind of like a repartee with someone as opposed to a request for funding. And so, what does this have to do with consciousness? Well, when you consider the awareness you have of God within yourself, are you wasting mind? Are you present to the fullness and the expansion of God? The limitless, boundless, boundarylessness of God. And what distracts you or what distracts us from fully knowing that you and God are one? And Kim and I did not plan this. We didn't talk about this together. But he talked about the beginning of the experience of COVID-19. Is COVID-19 actually distracting you from the fullness of what God is? Is the current state of your finances the distraction? Are personal relationships the distraction? Is romance? What is it that is distracting you from knowing that you and God are one? And that there may be parts of the experience that you have with God that are being wasted. Like when God calls you to do something and you ask, who, me? And it's a process everybody went through. Moses went through, Jesus went through it. Everybody went through it, but they went through it. They didn't get stopped by it, right? So we want to look and see, what is it that's getting in the way? And call it what it is, because that which we don't name, we can't do anything about. Imagine that somebody was raising a fund for you solely to be in relationship with God. That a request was made that funds be made available so that you could just be in relationship with God. And your only job is to be in relationship with God so that you don't know where you end and God begins. That's how intimately acquainted you are with God. That's how aware you are. That is the level of your consciousness. And our first response to a request like that would probably be, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that someone thinks that much of me that they would want to support that. And then I become present to the great responsibility that that might be. That someone is standing for your relationship with God. That someone is investing in that way. And the knowledge that someone thought enough of us to invest in the future relationship that we would have with the divine. And we'd want to do well. We'd want to prove that their investment was a good one. And here's the thing, all is not lost. We've still got time. And we need to tell ourselves the truth about the current state of affairs of our relationship with God, with divine. Because maybe that investment needs some attention. The second myth I'd like to explore with you is this idea that I'm concerned with all of mine. I am connected to God. God is connected to me. We are all one in God. And maybe is it that our pursuit of consciousness or relationship with God is very personal. It is a very personal experience. But sometimes, maybe too often, it doesn't go any further than that. We were having a conversation, as is a popular conversation right now, of have you been able to get a vaccine yet? Have you been able to get a jab? Did you get the one with two or did you get the one with one? And these are all appropriate conversations. And is our consciousness in that moment also of the distribution challenges around the world? Like, yeah, you may feel safe going into Costco, but what about when you get on a plane? What about the people on the other side of the planet who don't have any knowledge of when they might possibly get a shot. The equity of distribution of this life-saving, literally life-saving vaccine. And here's the thing, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I do want us to be present to that consciousness with God gives us access to everything. And we can be aware and concerned and take action about that which comes into our consciousness. And to ignore it, to ignore those things that come into our consciousness can actually be the beginning of our own suffering. And we have only ourselves to blame. When you get that note, when you get that psychic note about taking, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about myself, you just happen to be here right now. But I can tell you about the times where God has told me to do something, and I pretended that that thing didn't happen, and it would not leave me alone, including going to seminary. The pursuit of union with God cannot only be a solo journey. If we are with God, if our mind and the mind of God are one, if there's no separation between and among us, if anything that is not love is an illusion, then if your connection to mind is weakened, if your connection to God is weakened, so is mine. If you're struggling with living the life that God has given you, I struggle as well. And it may not look like it, it may not feel like it, but it is. So even if we believe that we're individually connected to consciousness, that we're individually connected to God, if we're not all connected, then we are incomplete. And the journey of life is for all of us to experience communion and connection and the awareness and the presence of God, not just for me to feel better about it. Just imagine, it's like when you're on a call like this, on a Zoom call, looking through windows, and you can see you're connected through these windows and we're witnessing one another. And then on your screen, you see this note that pops up that says, your signal is weak. And then all of a sudden, your connection gets weak. And then we might not be able to hear you, or we might not be able to see you. And we might hear you, but then we can't see you. And in the worst case scenario, you disappear. But your presence is missed. It's not like you disappear and go away. We just know that you are no longer there, and that is incomplete. It is only as we live in conscious union with Spirit and consciously let it work through us that we really live. So if we could become interested with all of mind, all of consciousness, all of God, then all of that becomes conscious of us. And then limits and limitations cease to be. The final myth I want to share with you is the idea that my actions are in concert with my consciousness. One of the definitions of consciousness that I spoke about before was this idea of awareness, especially concern for some social or political cause, or raising consciousness. And this is the part of the definition of consciousness that calls us to take action. And there are any number of causes and concerns that are available for us to raise consciousness around today. And the truth is that there have always been issues within our communal societal journey with one another where we have called to raise the consciousness of all of us, to raise the vibration so that we are all at least more aware of the suffering or the inequity that is going on around us. But what I think happens first is our own consciousness gets elevated. We get present to that something is amiss, is not in right relationship, is not balanced. And when we become aware of it and realize that there's something that we might be able to do about it, then we actually lean back into that relationship with God and say, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? And I know that each one of you, I just ask you to think for a second back to one of those moments when God became real to you, as real as you know your name, where the spirit of the divine mind transformed from idea to being. And you really can't explain the physicality of it, but somehow you knew you were directly connected to a consciousness, to a force, to a being, to an understanding which had no limit. And in that moment, you knew you were limitless as well. That the capacity for love and generosity and kindness and forgiveness were inexhaustible. And in the twinkling of an eye, you were alone again. So the invitation today is to raise your consciousness with God and in God, so there is no separation. That your words and your actions be an expression of the mind of God that is in you and is you. To notice when you're disconnected from consciousness and do what needs to be done to get reconnected. Because here's the thing, this spiritual internet, that reconnection is always available. And you don't have to pay anything for it except to say, I want to be reconnected. And don't just do it for yourself. Do it with the awareness that the collective consciousness is incomplete without you. The United Negro College Fund slogan got an update in 2013, and it now reads, a mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. Invest in your relationship with consciousness, invest in your relationship with God, and you will be the dividend that everyone can share. I leave you with this quote that was part of the One Spirit's daily word email blast, if you will. Pray unceasingly that all denial be stripped from your mind. Pray that something miraculous be born within us all. Give everything you have. Lay your hours and intellect, your heart and passion upon the altar of self-transformation and collective awakening. Begin now. That's by Anne Mortefi. God bless you. I thank you. I can't wait to be with you in person, but I just love being with you right now, because right now is what we have. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mark.